The cold, white meeting room on Space Station Concordia Prime felt heavy with 3 years of frustration. Ambassador David Thompson sat at the polished metal table, staring at the holographic documents floating before him. His jaw was tight as he read through the Galactic Council's newest demands. These weren't negotiations anymore, they were ultimatums dressed up as diplomacy. Across from him, the alien representatives lounged in their specialized chairs like predators who had already cornered their prey. Chairman Vorthak of the Reptini Empire leaned forward, his lizard-like scales catching the harsh overhead lights. His mouth curved into what might have been a smile if you didn't know better. Among his people, showing teeth was a sign of dominance, not friendship. "Let me make this crystal clear for your primitive minds," Vorthak hissed, his forked tongue flicking out between words. "Humanity will hand over every single colony in the Kepler sector. That's 12 worlds, 60 million people, and all the mining operations you've spent decades building." Councillor Zara of the Insectoid Collective buzzed her translucent wings impatiently. Her compound eyes reflected the room's light like broken mirrors as she spoke. "Furthermore, you will reduce your military fleet by exactly 60%. We're talking about scrapping 600 warships, including your precious carriers and battlecruisers." The third demand came from Whisper of Storms, a being made of swirling gas and energy contained within her environmental suit. When it spoke, colors rippled across its form like an angry rainbow. "Most importantly, all remaining human worlds will accept direct supervision from council administrators. You've proven you cannot govern yourselves responsibly." David felt his stomach turn. These weren't peace terms, they were surrender conditions designed to break humanity's spirit completely. He glanced sideways at his two companions. General Patricia Davis sat ramrod straight, her dark skin taut with controlled fury. Her fingers drummed silently against the table, a habit she developed during her 30 years of military service. Next to her, Dr. Kevin Washington adjusted his glasses nervously, but his eyes burned with the same anger David felt building in his chest. The three humans had endured months of insults disguised as diplomatic protocol. Every meeting brought new demands, each more outrageous than the last. The aliens spoke to them like parents scolding disobedient children, never acknowledging that humanity had built a thriving interstellar civilization in just 3 centuries. "Your species is too young, too emotional, too unpredictable," Hayla continued, her voice carrying the buzzing undertone common to her people. "Look at your history: constant wars, environmental destruction, social chaos. You need guidance from those who have achieved true stability." Vorthak nodded agreement, his scales rippling with satisfaction. "The Council has maintained peace for over 2,000 years. We know what works. Your human concepts of independence and self-determination are luxuries you cannot afford at your current level of development." David's hands slowly clenched into fists beneath the table. 3 years ago, when these talks began, humanity had approached the Galactic Council with genuine hope. Earth's leaders believed they could find their place among the stars through diplomacy and cooperation. They'd offered trade agreements, scientific exchanges, cultural partnerships, everything they thought mature civilizations would value. Instead, they'd found contempt wrapped in diplomatic language. Every human achievement was dismissed as luck or primitive stubbornness. Their technology was called crude, their social systems chaotic, their military doctrine barbaric. The message was clear: humanity could join galactic civilization, but only as a junior partner under permanent supervision. "And if we refuse these generous terms?" David asked, his voice carefully controlled despite the fire burning in his chest. The three aliens exchanged what might have been amused glances. Whisper of Storms pulsed with colors that David's briefings had taught him represented condescension and pity. "Then humanity will discover what true isolation means," the energy being replied. "No access to galactic trade routes. No advanced technology transfers. No protection from the various threats that lurk in deep space. Your species will be cut off completely, left to face the universe alone with nothing but your primitive fusion drives and kinetic weapons." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. David looked at his companions one more time. Patricia's jaw was set like stone, while Kevin had removed his glasses to clean them, a nervous habit that usually meant he was thinking furiously about something important. In that moment, David realized something fundamental had shifted. For 3 years, they'd come to these meetings hoping to find common ground, willing to compromise, believing that reasonable beings could work together. But there was no compromise here, only submission or defiance. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Vorthak's forked tongue flicked out again, tasting the tension in the recycled air. Hayla's wings buzzed with increasing frequency, while Whisper of Storms cycled through colors that suggested growing impatience. David stood up slowly, his chair sliding back with a soft whisper against the polished floor. The simple movement seemed to echo like thunder in the quiet room. Patricia and Kevin immediately followed his lead, gathering their data tablets and personal items with calm, deliberate motions. "Well?" Vorthak demanded, his scaled features twisting into an expression of irritation. "What is your answer?" David looked directly at each alien representative, memoizing their faces for what he knew would be the last time. When he spoke, his voice carried across the room with absolute clarity and finality. "Humanity withdraws from these negotiations. We'll find our own path forward." Without waiting for a response, the three humans walked toward the exit with measured steps. Behind them, the alien delegate sat frozen in shock, apparently unable to process what had just happened. The door sealed with a soft hiss, leaving the representatives of three galactic powers staring at empty chairs and wondering if they just made a terrible mistake. The moment the human shuttle disappeared into the swirling colors of hyperspace, Chairman Vorthak let out a sound that might have been laughter if it came from a human throat. Instead, it was a harsh, grating hiss that echoed through the empty conference room like steam escaping from a broken pipe. "Absolutely perfect," he said, turning to face his fellow council members with obvious satisfaction. His scaled hands moved across the holographic display, pulling up star charts and trade route maps. "Those stubborn primitives just solved our biggest problem for us." Councilor Zara's wings buzzed with excitement as she watched the data streams update in real time. Her compound eyes reflected the blue glow of the displays, creating an almost hypnotic pattern of light. "I have to admit, I was getting tired of pretending to negotiate with them. 3 years of listening to their naive speeches about cooperation and mutual respect was more than enough." The insectoid being moved closer to the tactical displays, her 6 legs clicking against the metal floor with each step. "Look at this intelligence summary we compiled over the past year. Humans currently control exactly 4 to 7 star systems, most of them barely developed colonies with populations under 10 million each. Their entire civilization could fit comfortably into a single sector of Reptini space." Whisper of Storms drifted toward the center of the room, its gaseous form pulsing with colors that indicated deep satisfaction among its kind. The energy being's voice carried an almost musical quality when it was pleased. The psychological profiles are even more revealing than the territorial analysis. Humans form emotional bonds not just with their own species, but with anything they perceive as vulnerable or in need of protection. Vorthak pulled up a series of classified reports that had taken the Council's intelligence services decades to compile. The documents painted a picture of humanity that seemed almost too convenient to be true. Every single human colony maintains regular contact with Earth. They send supply ships, personnel transfers, cultural exchanges, even entertainment broadcasts across hundreds of light years. Their emotional need for connection makes them completely predictable. The lizard-like being gestured toward a tactical projection showing human space in 3 dimensions. Red indicators marked every major colony, military installation, and industrial facility that Council intelligence had identified over the years. When resource shortages begin hitting their outer colonies in 6 months, they'll have 2 choices: abandon their people or come crawling back to us for trade agreements. Zara's buzzing grew more intense as she accessed additional files. "The economic analysis confirms our strategy. Without access to galactic trade networks, human colonies will run short of rare minerals within 8 months. Their fusion reactors require elements that only exist in Council-controlled space. Their manufacturing will collapse, their military will be grounded, and their people will start demanding that their leaders fix the situation." But the most damning evidence in the Council's files concerned humanity's military capabilities. Whisper of Storms cycled through data streams showing detailed scans of human warships, weapon systems, and defensive installations. The numbers seemed almost laughably primitive compared to the advanced civilizations that dominated the galaxy. 600 combat vessels total, the energy being announced with obvious amusement. Most of them using kinetic projectile weapons and nuclear warheads, technology that was obsolete when my species achieved spaceflight 2 millennia ago. Their largest battleships mass less than our standard patrol cruisers. Vorthak's forked tongue flicked out as he studied the military assessments. Even more telling, they have no significant allies among the established galactic powers. The few minor species they've made contact with are barely worth considering, primitive civilizations with no industrial base and no military strength to speak of. The Council's intelligence network had spent enormous resources tracking every aspect of human civilization. Trade missions had been monitored, diplomatic communications intercepted, and technological capabilities thoroughly analyzed. The picture that emerged was of a species that had expanded too quickly for its own good, spreading itself thin across dozens of star systems without building the deep infrastructure needed for true independence. Their greatest weakness is also their greatest strength from our perspective, Zara observed, pulling up psychological evaluation reports. Humans cannot abandon other humans. They will bankrupt themselves sending aid to struggling colonies rather than writing them off as acceptable losses. This emotional limitation makes them easy to manipulate. The insectoid being accessed files showing human disaster response patterns from the past century. Every natural catastrophe, every colony crisis, every emergency had triggered the same predictable response: massive resource allocation and personnel deployment regardless of the strategic cost. When their colonies start failing, Earth's government will face enormous internal pressure to negotiate our return, regardless of the terms we offer. What made the Council's confidence even stronger was the complete lack of any credible military threat from human space. Whisper of Storms displayed comparative analyses showing the technological gap between human weapons and Council defenses. Their most advanced plasma cannons would barely scratch the hull plating on our oldest destroyers. Their missile systems lacked the guidance sophistication to penetrate modern point defense networks. Vorthak closed the intelligence files with a gesture of finality. The timeline is clear. 6 months of isolation will create economic pressure. 8 months will trigger supply shortages that affect civilian populations. Within 1 standard year, internal political pressure will force their government to request new negotiations. The 3 council members began discussing how to divide humanity's former trade relationships among their own client species. Routes that had carried human goods would be redistributed to more reliable partners, civilizations that understood their proper place in the galactic hierarchy. The Kethari Commerce Guild has already expressed interest in taking over human shipping contracts in the Outer Rim territories, Zara noted, accessing commercial databases. They are much more flexible in their business relationships than humans ever were. But what the Council's extensive intelligence network had failed to detect was the most crucial element of all. Every human diplomat who had sat across from them in negotiations, every trade representative who had visited Council space, every cultural exchange student who had studied on alien worlds, they had all been carefully selected and thoroughly briefed on exactly what to reveal and what to conceal. For decades, humanity had been playing a much deeper game than anyone suspected. Every piece of intelligence the Council had gathered, every technological assessment they had made, every psychological profile they had compiled, it was all exactly what humanity wanted them to believe. The humans departing Concordia Prime weren't defeated negotiators fleeing in shame. They were intelligence operatives whose mission was finally complete. And somewhere in the depths of space, forces were already moving that would soon show the Galactic Council exactly how wrong they had been about everything. The silence from human space stretched on like a held breath that never seemed to end. 6 months had passed since the dramatic walkout at Concordia Prime, and the Galactic Council's monitoring stations had picked up almost nothing from the 47 systems humanity called home. At first, this seemed like exactly what Chairman Vorthak and his colleagues had predicted. In the gleaming towers of the Council Intelligence Division, junior analysts huddled over their workstations with growing concern. The youngest among them, a Reptini named Sisk who had graduated from the academy just 2 years earlier, noticed the pattern first. One by one, the automated monitoring posts positioned along the borders of human territory had stopped transmitting their daily reports. Sisk gathered his courage and approached Vorthak's massive office, his clawed feet clicking nervously against the polished stone floor. The chairman's desk was a monument to bureaucratic power, carved from a single piece of black crystal and covered with holographic displays showing trade routes, military positions, and economic data from across the galaxy. "Sir," Sisk began hesitantly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to report something unusual. Our monitoring stations near human space, they've all gone silent." Vorthak didn't even glance up from the glowing trade reports floating above his desk. His scaled fingers moved through the data streams with practiced efficiency, checking profit margins and resource allocation charts. "Equipment failure," he said dismissively, his forked tongue flicking out in annoyance. "Those primitive humans can barely keep their own fusion reactors running. I doubt their territory is maintaining our monitoring equipment properly." The young analyst shifted uncomfortably, his training telling him this explanation didn't make sense. "But sir, these are our monitoring stations, not human equipment. They're designed to operate independently for decades without maintenance. Are you questioning my assessment?" Vorthak's head snapped up, his yellow eyes fixing on Sisk with predatory focus. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Perhaps you'd prefer to spend some time reviewing basic intelligence protocols instead of wasting my time with minor technical issues. Sisk retreated quickly, but the nagging worry in his gut wouldn't go away. Over the next few weeks, more disturbing reports began filtering through the intelligence network. A Hive commercial transport carrying rare minerals had approached the Sol system to test human resolve. Their ship had simply vanished from all sensor arrays. No distress beacon, no debris cloud, no trace that it had ever existed. When Counselor Zara was informed, she buzzed her wings irritably and suggested the obvious explanation. Pirates, she declared during the weekly intelligence briefing. Or mechanical failure. These commercial vessels are notoriously unreliable, especially when operated by profit-motivated crews. But the disappearances continued. A scientific research vessel from the Nebula Collective went missing near the human colony of New Sparta. 3 independent trader ships lost contact while attempting to scout former human trade routes. Each incident was explained away by the Council leadership: space pirates, equipment malfunctions, navigational errors in the dangerous regions between star systems. The junior analysts grew increasingly nervous, but their concerns were dismissed as inexperience and overactive imaginations. After all, the Council's intelligence files clearly showed that humanity lacked the military capability to threaten even civilian vessels. Their primitive kinetic weapons and fusion drives were no match for modern shield technology and point defense systems. Everything changed when Agent Blade, one of the Insectoid Intelligence Division's most experienced operatives, managed to deploy a stealth reconnaissance probe near New Detroit. The probe was state-of-the-art technology, designed to slip past even advanced sensor networks and gather intelligence without being detected. What the probe recorded sent shockwaves through the Council chambers that no amount of bureaucratic denial could contain. The orbital space around New Detroit bustled with activity that defied every intelligence assessment the Council had compiled over the past decade. Massive defense platforms hung in perfect formation around the planet, not the crude weapon satellites their files described, but sleek installations that bristled with technology that didn't match any known human designs. The defensive stations were enormous, each one the size of a small city. Their surfaces curved and flowed like living metal, covered with sensor arrays and weapon systems that pulsed with barely contained energy. Stranger still, the technology appeared to be a hybrid of multiple design philosophies, human engineering combined with elements that looked distinctly alien. But the orbital defenses were only the beginning of the shock. The shipyards floating in the outer system showed construction projects that made no sense according to Council intelligence estimates. Vessels 3 times larger than anything in human service records took shape in massive construction bays, their hulls gleaming with the same hybrid technology as the defense platforms. This must be some kind of mistake. Whisper of storms pulsed nervously when the footage was presented during an emergency intelligence briefing. The energy being's colors shifted rapidly between confusion and fear as it processed the implications. Our files clearly show that humans lack the industrial capacity for projects of this magnitude. Agent Blade's report was clinical and terrifying in its precision. The probe had detected at least 40 major construction sites around New Detroit alone, each one producing warships that dwarfed the largest vessels in humanity's previously known fleet. The industrial infrastructure supporting this construction showed signs of technology that shouldn't exist in human space. Vorthak studied the footage with growing unease, his predatory confidence cracking for the first time in decades. "Run deep-range sensor sweeps of every human system," he ordered, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "I want to know what's happening in their space." The results that came back over the following weeks painted a picture that shattered every assumption the Council had made about humanity. Every colony, every industrial world, every supposedly primitive outpost showed signs of massive military buildup. Orbital shipyards that hadn't existed 6 months earlier now operated around the clock. Defense platforms that could threaten Council battle fleets protected worlds that were supposed to be helpless farming colonies. Most disturbing of all were the intercepted communications. Council cryptographers managed to decode fragments of human military transmissions, expecting to find evidence of panic and desperate attempts to re-establish diplomatic contact. Instead, they found calm, professional discussions of construction schedules, deployment timelines, and operational readiness reports. The humans weren't afraid. They weren't begging for the Council's protection or trade relationships. They were preparing for something massive, and they approached their preparations with the methodical efficiency of people who had been planning for this moment for years. In the depths of Council intelligence headquarters, young analysts like Sisk worked frantically to understand how their assessments could have been so completely wrong. The humans they had studied and dismissed as primitive had somehow transformed themselves into a military power that threatened the very foundations of galactic civilization. The quiet storm was building in human space, and the Galactic Council was about to discover just how badly they had misjudged their former negotiating partners. The truth came crashing down on the Galactic Council like a massive asteroid smashing into an unsuspecting planet. Agent Blade had returned from the most dangerous intelligence mission in Council history, a deep infiltration of Earth itself. What this veteran spy brought back wasn't just information, it was a complete destruction of everything the Council thought they knew about humanity. The emergency session convened in the Council's most secure chamber, deep beneath the capital city's surface. Councillor Zara's wings trembled as she processed the incoming data streams, her compound eyes reflecting the harsh light of classified documents that painted an impossible picture. They knew, she buzzed in complete disbelief, her voice barely above a whisper. These humans knew exactly what we were planning from the very beginning. The evidence Agent Blade had risked everything to obtain was overwhelming and terrifying. Hidden deep beneath Earth's surface, massive manufacturing complexes had been operating for decades. These weren't the crude industrial facilities Council intelligence had catalogued, they were sophisticated production centers creating technology that shouldn't exist in human space. Chairman Vorthak studied the footage with growing horror, his scaled hands shaking slightly as he manipulated the holographic displays. The underground factories stretched for kilometers in every direction, their assembly lines producing weapons and starship components that incorporated design elements from dozens of different alien civilizations. This technology, he hissed through clenched teeth. Half of these systems are based on our own classified military designs. The revelation struck like lightning. Every diplomatic mission humanity had sent to Council space, every trade negotiation, every cultural exchange, they had all been elaborate intelligence-gathering operations. Human diplomats hadn't been naive idealists seeking galactic friendship, they had been highly trained spies systematically collecting information about alien technology, military capabilities, and psychological weaknesses. Agent Blade's report detailed how human operatives had spent decades reverse engineering captured alien technology. A crashed Reptini scout ship here, a damaged insectoid courier vessel there, components accidentally left behind during trade negotiations, humanity had been collecting samples for generations, slowly building a comprehensive understanding of galactic technology. But the technological deception was only the beginning. Vorthak's scales flushed deep crimson with rage as he read through psychological assessment files that made his blood run cold. "Look at this intelligence," he snarled, his forked tongue flicking out in agitation. "They've been studying our decision-making patterns, our cultural biases, our military doctrines. Every single negotiation was nothing but a data collection exercise." The humans had compiled detailed psychological profiles of every major Council species. They understood how Reptini pride could be manipulated, how insectoid hive mind thinking created predictable blind spots, how energy beings like Whisper of Storms processed information differently from physical species. Every weakness, every cultural bias, every strategic limitation had been carefully catalogued and analyzed. Whisper of Storms cycled through colors of fear and disbelief as additional intelligence reports flooded the chamber. The scope of their deception goes far beyond simple espionage, the energy being pulsed anxiously. Agent Blade discovered that humanity has been manipulating our intelligence networks for decades. Half the information in our files about human capabilities was deliberately planted. The worst revelation was still coming. Deep space reconnaissance missions launched in desperation over the past month had finally returned with data that shattered every assumption about human territorial control. The 4 to 7 star systems the Council had identified weren't the extent of human civilization, they were just the systems humanity wanted the Council to know about. The true scope of human expansion was staggering. Over 300 star systems fell under human control or influence, hidden behind sophisticated sensor networks and artificial navigation hazards that had fooled Council surveys for generations. Entire sectors that appeared empty on galactic charts actually housed thriving human colonies and military installations. How is this possible? Zara buzzed frantically, her wings creating a sound like grinding metal. Our deep space surveys are the most advanced in the galaxy. How could we have missed hundreds of inhabited systems? The answer was as brilliant as it was terrifying. Humans had learned to hide in plain sight, using their understanding of Council sensor technology to create blind spots and false readings. They had seeded space with artificial asteroids that masked energy signatures, deployed sensor scramblers that created false stellar phenomena, and even constructed fake abandoned ruins to discourage exploration of key systems. But perhaps the most devastating revelation concerned the minor species that the Council had dismissed as irrelevant. Whisper of Storms pulsed colors of pure terror as intelligence reports revealed the true extent of humanity's diplomatic success. The Cathari Commerce Guild, the Millennial Collective, the Void Dancers, the Crystal Singers, they've all signed mutual defense pacts with humanity. What the Council had arrogantly dismissed as human emotional weakness had actually been a systematic campaign of alliance building. Humanity's tendency to form bonds with other species, their willingness to help struggling colonies, their apparently naive idealism, it had all been part of a carefully orchestrated strategy to build a coalition of species that the Council had ignored or oppressed. Agent Blade's files revealed the extent of these alliances. 237 minor species had signed various forms of cooperation agreements with humanity. Some provided raw materials, others offered strategic bases, many contributed specialized knowledge and technology. Together, they formed a shadow network that spanned half the galaxy. The intercepted communication that sealed the Council's fate crackled through the chamber speakers with crystal clarity. General Monica Davis's voice carried the calm authority of someone who had been planning this moment for years. Phase 1 complete. All assets in position. Manufacturing targets exceeded by 12%. Alliance coordination is green across all sectors. Await authorization for Phase 2. The implication hit the Council like a physical blow. This wasn't a desperate military build-up in response to isolation. This was the culmination of a decades-long strategic plan that had been set in motion long before the first peace negotiations began. Humanity hadn't been trying to join galactic civilization, they had been preparing to reshape it entirely. As the full scope of human preparation became clear, one terrifying fact emerged above all others. The humans weren't just preparing for war against the Council. They were preparing to remake the entire galaxy according to their own vision of how civilized species should interact. And they had spent decades making sure they would have the power to enforce that vision when the time came. The emergency alarms screaming through Council headquarters created a sound like the galaxy itself was dying. In the main command center, holographic displays showed energy signatures that defied belief, massive human fleets materializing simultaneously across 17 critical star systems throughout Council space. These weren't the primitive vessels from intelligence files, but sleek warships that dwarfed anything the Council had in active service. Chairman Vorthak stood frozen before the tactical display, his scaled hands trembling as he watched red icons representing human forces appear at every strategic choke point in Council territory. The Kepler Junction, the Nexus Gate, the trade hub at Centrum Prime, every system that controlled the flow of commerce and military movement now hosted uninvited human guests. "How many ships?" he whispered, his voice barely audible above the chaos of panicking staff members. "Preliminary scans indicate over 2,000 vessels," reported the duty officer, a young insectoid whose wings buzzed with barely controlled terror. "Admiral, these aren't attack formations, they're positioned for complete territorial control." The genius of the human strategy was immediately apparent to anyone with military training. They hadn't come to destroy Council forces, they had come to make Council forces irrelevant. Every major fleet base found itself cut off from reinforcement. Every trade route was suddenly under human oversight. Every strategic resource depot was within range of weapons that Council scientists were still trying to understand. Then came the communication that would echo through galactic history. Every screen, every speaker, every communication device throughout Council space simultaneously activated with the same message. The voice was calm, professional, and absolutely unmistakable in its authority. Galactic Council leadership, Admiral Monica Davis announced from the bridge of the massive vessel that sensors identified as UES determination. The Terran Alliance offers revised terms for galactic cooperation. You have 72 hours to provide your response. The message was brief, but its implications were staggering. This wasn't a negotiation, it was a fait accompli delivered with the politeness that only absolute power could afford. The humans had positioned themselves to control galactic civilization, and they were offering the Council a choice of how to surrender gracefully. In the days that followed, the true scope of humanity's transformation became clear. Their trade networks, which the Council had assumed would collapse within months, had actually expanded to include hundreds of previously unknown species. Systems that appeared empty on Council charts buzzed with industrial activity that had been hidden for decades. Most shocking of all, many Council client species were openly declaring their intention to join the Terran Alliance. Vorthak found himself in the humiliating position of begging for an audience aboard the human flagship. The shuttle ride to the determination felt like a journey to his own execution. Gone was the arrogant confidence he displayed just months earlier at Concordia Prime. In its place was barely controlled panic and the desperate hope that humanity might show more mercy than the Council had ever offered others. The meeting room aboard the human vessel was a study in contrast to the sterile conference chamber where this crisis had begun. Warm lighting replaced harsh fluorescence. Comfortable chairs surrounded a table made of actual wood rather than cold metal. Even the air smelled different, clean and natural instead of recycled and processed. Ambassador David Thompson sat across from his former opponents, his posture relaxed and confident. The transformation was remarkable, where once he had endured condescending lectures, he now radiated the quiet authority of someone who held all the advantages. Beside him, General Patricia Davis reviewed holographic displays showing Council fleet positions with the casual interest of someone examining weather reports. Ambassador Thompson, Vorthak began, his voice cracking with the strain of swallowing his pride. Perhaps we were overly hasty in our previous discussions. Surely civilized beings can find common ground for mutual benefit. The irony was lost on no one in the room. These were almost exactly the words humanity had used months earlier, back when they were the ones seeking accommodation from a position of weakness. David allowed himself a small smile as he activated a datapad and slid it across the polished wooden surface. The terms are quite reasonable, he replied, his tone carrying the same professional courtesy he'd maintained even during the darkest moments of the original negotiations. Complete cessation of tributary demands on all minor species. Open borders for trade and cultural exchange. Mutual defense agreements based on genuine cooperation rather than forced subjugation. Councillor Zara's wings buzzed with frantic energy as she reviewed the proposed treaty. These terms would completely restructure how galactic civilization operates. You're asking us to abandon thousands of years of established governance. Dr. Kevin Washington, now bearing the title of Alliance Science Advisor, leaned forward with the patient expression of a teacher explaining basic concepts to struggling students. That's exactly the point, Counselor. The old system was built on the premise that might makes right, that advanced civilizations have the authority to dominate less developed species. We're offering something better, a genuine alliance of equals. The negotiations that followed were unlike anything in galactic history. Where the Council had once made demands backed by threats of isolation and military force, they now found themselves pleading for reasonable terms from beings they had dismissed as primitive. Every argument they raised was calmly refuted with evidence of humanity's comprehensive preparation and overwhelming strategic advantage. Whisper storms pulsed through desperate colors of negotiation, its gaseous form shifting between hues that indicated fear, confusion, and reluctant respect. The energy being had spent centuries participating in council domination of lesser species, and now found itself on the receiving end of superior power wielded with restraint it had never learned to show others. What assurance do we have that humanity won't simply become the new oppressor? The energy being asked, its voice carrying harmonics of genuine concern. David leaned back in his chair with the same calm demeanor he had shown during that first fateful meeting. You have our word, backed by our actions. But more importantly, you have the safeguard of our alliance structure. Unlike the Council's top-down hierarchy, the Terran Alliance operates through consensus among equals. No single species, including humanity, has the authority to dictate terms to others. The final revelation came when David quietly mentioned the scope of humanity's new partnerships. Of course, you're free to reject these terms and attempt to maintain the old system. But I should point out that our minor species allies, all 237 of them, are quite interested in seeing how this conversation concludes. The number hit the former Council leadership like a physical blow. 237 species that had been ignored, exploited, or dismissed by Council authority were now part of humanity's alliance network. The balance of galactic power hadn't just shifted, it had been completely overturned. 6 months after signing the Galactic Alliance Charter, former Chairman Vorthak found himself serving as regional coordinator for the Reptini sectors, working alongside human administrators who treated him with professional respect despite his history of arrogance and oppression. The irony wasn't lost on him as he filed weekly reports to Terran Alliance headquarters, participating in a system that actually functioned through cooperation rather than domination. As he worked late one evening, processing resource allocation requests from dozens of species that now had equal voice in galactic affairs, Vorthak reflected on the lesson humanity had taught them all. They had mistaken patience for weakness, diplomacy for desperation, and emotional intelligence for primitive thinking. The humans hadn't just won a war, they had demonstrated that there was indeed a better way to organize galactic civilization. The old Council had ruled through fear and maintained peace through oppression. The Terran Alliance governed through consensus and maintained stability through genuine cooperation. It was a revolution that had been centuries in the making, and it had succeeded not through superior firepower alone, but through the simple radical idea that all sentient species deserved dignity and respect.